Buongiorno, I am Antonio Gramsci, 1891–1937, an Italian Marxist philosopher and political theorist, best known as the founder of the Communist Party of Italy, PCI, and one of the most original thinkers of the 20th century. Imprisoned by Mussolini's fascist regime, I became a prison intellectual, composing my most influential writings, the prison notebooks, behind bars. There, I laid the foundations of neo-Marxism, expanding classical Marxist thought to include the roles of civil society, education, media, and religion in sustaining power. Today, I am remembered as the architect of cultural hegemony and a revolutionary voice who showed that lasting change must begin with ideas, beliefs, and institutions. Welcome to Socio-Exploration. In this self-reflection, I'll guide you through the struggles and insights that shaped my political life and intellectual legacy. I was born on January 22, 1891, in Alice, Sardinia, into a modest household. Early poverty and social exclusion deeply shaped my sensitivity to inequality and marginalization. Despite chronic health struggles and economic hardship, I excelled in my studies and eventually secured a scholarship to the University of Turin. Turin, an industrial city throbbing with worker unrest and factory strikes, became my intellectual crucible. There, I was immersed in political activism and Marxist theory, aligning myself with Italy's socialist movement. I witnessed firsthand the revolutionary potential of the working class, but also recognized how bourgeois values were deeply woven into everyday life, shaping the consciousness of even the oppressed. During the early 1920s, I traveled to the Soviet Union, where I met Yulia Shukt, a talented Russian violinist. We married in 1923, and although our time together was brief due to my later imprisonment in Italy, we shared a profound emotional and intellectual bond. Julia remained in Moscow with our children, while I faced years of incarceration under fascist rule. We had two sons, Delio and Giuliano, whom I rarely saw. Yet through my letters from prison, I sustained a heartfelt connection with Julia and Delio. Letters that today stand as both personal testimony and political philosophy, revealing a father and thinker torn by distance but sustained by hope. In 1921, I co-founded the Italian Communist Party, driven by the belief that working-class leadership was essential for the radical transformation of society. However, the rise of Mussolini's fascist regime soon cast a long shadow over Italy. In 1926, I was arrested by the fascists and sentenced to a long prison term. Despite failing health, I devoted my imprisoned years to writing. My prison notebooks, a body of work composed in confinement, reimagined Marxist theory for a new age, emphasizing the importance of culture, ideology, and civil society in the struggle for hegemony and social change. Even in such harsh conditions, I continued to write with discipline and vision, while maintaining loving correspondence with my family. I was released shortly before my death, and on April 27, 1937, I passed away in Rome. Though my body was weakened, my spirit endured. My ideas, rooted in resistance, culture, and revolution, outlived the regime that sought to silence me. I was laid to rest in the Cimitero del Verano, the historic cemetery in Rome, Italy. What I leave behind is not just a collection of writings, but a legacy of revolutionary thought, cultural resistance, and intellectual awakening for generations to come. I wasn't merely interested in who ruled, but how they ruled, how domination became normalized through culture and education. My theories shifted the Marxist focus from the economy alone to superstructures, schools, media, religion, and intellectual leadership. My first theory is the theory of cultural hegemony. In my observation, the ruling class does not sustain its dominance merely through laws, force, or the control of capital. Its true power lies in shaping the minds of the people through schools, churches, newspapers, and popular culture. It creates a worldview that appears natural, unquestionable, and universal. This is what I have called cultural hegemony, a system where the values and beliefs of the elite become the common sense of the masses. This dominance is subtle, yet powerful. People consent to their own subordination not because they are coerced, but because they have been conditioned to believe that the existing order is just and inevitable. If we are to challenge capitalism effectively, we cannot rely only on direct political struggle. We must wage a war of position, building a counter-hegemony. That means forming a new culture, rooted in working-class experience, that can rival the dominant ideology and gradually win hearts and minds. True revolution, I believe, begins with ideas, with the slow construction of an alternative moral and intellectual leadership. Only when people begin to think differently, to see through the myths that mask their oppression, can they begin to act differently. Cultural struggle, then, is not a secondary front. It is the foundation upon which lasting liberation must be built. Second one is the theory of organic intellectuals. I propose that intellectuals are not born in ivory towers. Every social group creates its own thinkers, organic intellectuals, who articulate the group's experiences and aspirations. Unlike traditional intellectuals who serve elites, organic intellectuals help the oppressed understand their condition and envision alternatives. Education, then, is a battleground, where minds are either shaped for compliance or awakened for liberation. The third is the theory of war of position versus war of maneuver. I made a crucial distinction between two revolutionary strategies. War of maneuver, sudden, direct attacks on state power, typical in revolutions. War of position, slow, patient, cultural struggle, changing hearts, minds, and institutions over time. In capitalist societies, I argued, a war of position is essential. True transformation requires gaining moral and ideological leadership, not just seizing the state. I did not live a life of comfort or scholarly privilege. I was not afforded the luxury of publishing great volumes while I lived. My thoughts were not born in freedom, but in the shadow of prison walls, under censorship, poverty, and the slow erosion of my health. Yet even in confinement, I did not surrender to despair. I wrote with resolve, knowing that while regimes fall, ideas endure. My words were shaped by struggle, not only political struggle, but a personal one against the silence that authoritarianism tries to impose. After my death in 1937, the pages I had written, my reflections, theories, and letters, were smuggled out of prison. They became my voice in the world I could no longer see, the continuation of a dialogue I had begun with the working class, with revolutionaries, and with those who believe culture is not neutral, but contested. In what follows, I offer you a record of the writings I managed to produce, despite all constraints. These are not merely publications, they are weapons of thought, formed in darkness, aimed at awakening. 1. L'Ordine Nuovo, 1919-1920. In the aftermath of the First World War, I co-founded L'Ordine Nuovo, the New Order, with fellow revolutionaries in Turin. It was more than a newspaper, it was a political tool, a space for working-class self-expression, and a blueprint for the workers' councils. Through its pages, I called for a revolution rooted in the lived experience of factory workers, one that emerged not from abstract ideology, but from the rhythms of labor, struggle, and solidarity. This publication was where I first expressed my belief that revolution is not simply a seizure of power, but the transformation of consciousness. Second, articles in Avanti and other socialist papers, 1916 to 1926. Before I was ever imprisoned, I was a journalist. My pen was my weapon. From 1916 onward, I wrote for Avanti, the official paper of the Italian Socialist Party, and other socialist journals, offering essays, critiques, and commentary on politics, culture, education, and fascism. These writings reflected my early ideological formation, influenced by Marx, Lenin, and the Italian workers' movements. Many of these essays would later be collected, preserving the voice of a young militant who saw culture and class as inseparable. Third, Quaderni del Carcere, Prison Notebooks, 1929 to 1935. When Mussolini's regime silenced me through incarceration, they thought they could halt my influence. But I resisted with my mind. From 1929 to 1935, I filled 33 notebooks, now known as the Quaderni del Carcere, under the surveillance of prison guards and with failing health. In those notebooks, I examined the architecture of power, how consent is built, how ideology functions, and how culture can serve either domination or liberation. I developed ideas like cultural hegemony, the organic intellectual, the war of position, and critiques of Americanism and Fordism. These were not drafts, they were acts of resistance. Quarta, Lettere dal Carcere, Letters from Prison, published 1947. While the notebooks contain my theoretical reflections, the letters from prison reveal my heart. These were messages to my family, my wife Julia, and my comrades. They expose not only my thoughts on politics and literature, but also my deep suffering, my love for my sons, and my philosophical endurance. After my death, these letters were published in 1947, giving readers a glimpse into the soul of a man who refused to let prison break his spirit. Fifth thematic volumes of Prison Notebooks, published 1948 to 1951. My prison writings, scattered across notebooks and written under constraint, needed organization. Between 1948 and 1951, scholars and comrades arranged them thematically and published them in 4 major volumes. Il materialismo storico, gli intellettuali e l'organizzazione della cultura, note sul Machiavelli, and letteratura e vita nazionale. These editions made my fragmented thoughts more accessible, spreading my work across Italy and beyond, even as fascism tried to bury them. 6. Selections from the Prison Notebooks, 1971, English translation. Decades after my death, my ideas found a voice in English through the 1971 translation, Selections from the Prison Notebooks, compiled by Quinton Hoare and Jeffrey Noel Smith. This volume brought together some of my most essential reflections on state, civil society, culture, and ideology, allowing my theories to shape movements far beyond Italy, from Latin American liberation theology to British cultural studies. In many ways, this translation breathed new life into the Marxist tradition, adapting it for a modern world. Though I never ruled or marched in victory, my words traveled far. From Latin America's liberation theology to modern cultural studies, my ideas inspired movements that challenged not just economic injustice, but ideological control. Do subscribe, like and click the bell icon to future notifications. Grazie e buona giornata.